Welcome to the Smoke Pit. Joining us today, we have Andy Cunningham. She runs the Cunningham Collective, which is a fantastic consulting organization. You've probably heard of them. She's also the author of Get to Aha, which is a very popular and successful book about positioning in business. And also joining us today, we have Abbas Hyder. You remember him from a previous episode, Travel Like a Boss. How is everyone doing today?
Great. It's great to be here. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm doing good. Haven't traveled much, but hoping in the next month or two I'll go somewhere.
Well, so Andy has taken us to great heights in our imagination and our creativity, and helping us to expand our perception of what it means to really utilize positioning and business. And so, in your own words, could you please tell us a little bit about what that means to you?
So positioning is like the epicenter of everything in business. And I like to say it's the epicenter of great marketing, and great marketing is the epicenter of great business. So if you want to have a successful business, you have to start with understanding what your position in the market is. And it needs to be compelling, and it needs to be unique, and it needs to drive sales. So
well, ultimately, that is, yeah,
I'm
for
very
sure.
passionate about this topic.
Well, you have worked with some very passionate people and some very successful companies. So, if I understand this correctly, you worked with Steve Jobs building Macintosh.
I did. I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to work with Steve back in the early 80s. Yes, that was another century ago. But it was a great experience. And I didn't actually work at Apple. I worked at an agency called Regis McKenna. And Regis McKenna had a very special relationship with Apple and with Steve Jobs. And I got to be the person to lead the launch of the Macintosh effort that we were.
And was Regis also hired for NeXT and Pixar as well, or was that?
No, that was just me. Unfortunately, no. So I left Regis after Steve got fired from Apple. I left Regis and formed my own company, thinking I would never see Steve Jobs again.
Solidarity.
And literally 2 weeks later, I got a call from Steve asking me to come and help him. And I can tell you some stories about that. But basically, Regis couldn't work with Steve. He left Apple because it created a conflict of interest with his business, which was with Apple.
Now,
so Steve needed to work with somebody outside.
That's pretty cool that you got a call from Steve Jobs personally. Second is, we've always heard, that yes, he was a genius, but he was also kind of difficult to work with. Things that we've heard and watched in documentaries. How was your experience working with him?
Yeah, he was extremely difficult. He was the most difficult person that I've ever worked with, or that I've ever even heard of. but he was difficult in ways that were pure, if you understand what that means. So his agenda was really to change the world with that computer. That is all he cared about. So he didn't care if you were old or young or a man or a woman or a Martian. None of that mattered to him. What mattered is, could your skills add value to the project that he had to change the world with that computer? If the answer is yes, then you got to be on the team. If the answer is no, then you were eliminated from the team. And there were times when he would get rid of people throughout the course and then bring them back, which happened to me several times after he left Apple.
Several times.
Like 5 times. I think he fired me.
5 times.
I kept getting the opportunity to come back, and I said yes. I was young then,
Was that in NeXT? Because I know he was pretty frustrated with NeXT with the cost and it just not picking up.
Yeah, it was all about NeXT. Yes, absolutely. And he wanted it. Let's face it, NeXT was a failure, right? The company was a failure, and so when your company's failing and you're the founder of it, everything's a problem, right? And so you're constantly trying to find the way to fix it. And so if he didn't like something that I did, I became the problem of that week, right? And so get rid of Andy. And then a week later, he realized, okay, maybe that wasn't the problem. Let's call Andy back. And I always came back every time he called, except for the last time. He called me the last time that he fired me. And again, it was about 3 weeks later, something like that. And at this point, I had a relatively large agency. I don't know, probably 150 people at least. I had payroll to make. I had all these things I had to do. And I had taken on a competitor to NeXT at that time, right before he called me back. It was a company called oh God, it was a joint venture between Apple and IBM, and I can't remember. Taligent. It was called Taligent. It no longer exists, but he didn't like Apple and he didn't like IBM. So the fact that it was a joint venture was a problem for him. And it was developing technology that could be seen as being competitive with the NeXT machine. So I said, I'm really sorry, Steve, but I've got payroll to make. And I took on Taligent as a client. And that was it. He didn't talk to me again for 10 years.
Oh, wow. Now you worked with Guy Kawasaki as well when you were with Mac. How is he? I've read his book Enchantment. Love that book. How was working with Guy Kawasaki?
I love Guy. Talk about passion. Guy is an extremely passionate person about entrepreneurialism and about evangelism, which is really kind of a profession that he invented at Apple, and it has gone, viral. Now lots of companies have evangelists, and he developed the whole program, invented the whole idea. And Guy is probably the world's best salesman. I think he could sell anything to anyone, and that's kind of what he tapped into in order to create that role. So he's great.
Amazing.
So when you were working with Steve Jobs, did you ever witness him have that aha moment when lightning struck and he came to that epiphany, which is kind of a reference to the book that. So I was wondering if you ever witnessed something like that, whether it was with him or with someone that you're working with, that kind of really turned into something special.
Yeah, I mean, there were lots of ahas along the way with many different things, and I'll just explain one that happened in the Macintosh arena, which was, everybody's heard of vertical marketing and horizontal marketing. Well, we as a team, mostly it was Mike Murray who came up with this idea that what we were going to do at Apple is we were going to do diagonal marketing, which was an aha, right? It was like, no, we're going to build a product that is both designed for businesses but also designed for individuals. And that was really the first time that I'd ever run into this idea that B2B and B2C could be merged into something that I have since started to call B2P, business to people, because you're actually selling to a human being at the end of the day anyway. So that was one aha that we came to. But Steve was pretty solid about what he wanted to do with that computer, and he did, he did it. But I should point out that Macintosh was not a success for 10 years. It took 10 years, 8 of which those years Steve wasn't at Apple. So they fired him over the Macintosh because it wasn't succeeding. And I thought they might kill it, but they ended up not killing it while he was gone. And it really foundered in the market until he came back and figured out the strategy. And this was another aha. He figured out that the people who were attracted to Macintosh were the creative types, right? And when he came back, he decided to lean into that and leverage that tribe, if you will, of creative types, and start speaking to them and start expanding that tribe, which is exactly what he did with that brilliant ad campaign, Here's to the Crazy Ones, if you remember that one. Mm-hmm. And that was the moment he realized, oh, there's a tribe of people who love this thing. I should be leveraging them and maximizing that and building that, not trying to take IBM out of the picture and replace IBMs with Macintoshes, which was his original idea.
So do you think that was an example of him using creativity to enhance his positioning?
Well, I think that he observed. I think one of the things that when you're young, and he was very young when he was running Apple, or he actually wasn't even running Apple, as you might remember. He had John Sculley was the CEO during the Macintosh era. And I think what he wanted something so very badly, right? He had an enemy, because that's one of the mantras of great marketing: have an enemy, right? So you can position yourself against an enemy. And the enemy he chose was IBM. And IBM was a pretty fierce and giant enemy that had, millions of customers all over the world. And there was no way he was going to dislodge IBM from the market. But that was kind of the David and Goliath story that he was trying to tell. So it wasn't until he matured a little bit through the NeXT experience and getting older that he realized maybe there's another way to succeed here, and that's when he became very observant and watched who was attracted to the Macintosh and how they were using the computer. And that's when he decided, I'm going to lean into that and make that my strategy. And that was really smart. But he didn't do that early on.
Andy, in your book, you talk about the difference between branding and positioning, and a lot of people confuse the two, right?
Yeah.
How do you define branding versus positioning? Is one more creative than the other? So is branding the creative side? How do you define the two?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think the word brand and branding is probably the most misused word in the whole entire English language, or at least in the marketing lexicon. So to me, they're equally important. One is a yin and one is a yang, and together they make they make up what I call a business identity, right? Your business identity is made up of your position, which is a very rational description of who you are and why you matter, and your strategy. And branding to me is the emotional expression of that strategy. So from a creative perspective, the branding side is far more creative, right? Because you need people to come up with images and tone of voice and personality and, you know, those things we all consider to be the fun part of building a brand. And then but the positioning part is just the facts about who you are and why you matter, and how are you different from everyone else, and why should anyone care about you. And that's not very creative. It actually takes a lot of research and a lot of discipline and a lot of rigor to come to the answer to those questions. I mean, think about yourself as a human. How many people could actually answer the question in a minute, who are you and why do you matter? It takes a lot of work to go through that, and it's tough. And most companies just don't do it, right? They start immediately with the emotional stuff because that's much more fun. It's much more creative. And that's what branding agencies do, right? They come in and they'll redo your logo, and they'll create a campaign for you, and they'll create a tagline and do all these creative things. And mostly they give short shrift to the rational side of your identity, which is so important. And the other thing I'll say about that is it needs to be done first. Just like humans, companies are a lot like people because they're made up of people and they serve people. So when you're in the process of trying to figure out your business identity, you should start with the rational side and then layer the emotional side on top of it so that it aligns with the rational side, as opposed to what, you know, people want to do, which is let's just jump right to the creative fun stuff. Just like humans, you know, you always want to think before you leap, right? We don't always do that, but that's what you should be doing.
For sure. And in your books, you've talked about how important it is for companies to figure out their DNA. Would you say that positioning and branding are the adjacent side of that helix? And if so, what connects the two?
So the notion of your DNA, this was actually a thing that I discovered on my own, and no other firm that I know of thinks of it this way. But I was asked by a client once, what is the process you go through to help me figure out my position in the market? And I couldn't answer that question, because really the answer to the question is what every other branding person would have said back 15 years ago when I did this. They would have said, you know, I lock myself in a dark room after reading all this research and talking to some of your customers. I light a candle, I sing Kumbaya, and I come out with this incredible ta-da, here's a great tagline for you, or ta-da, here's a great logo for you, or here's your color palette, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I
And I
believe that's
didn't
how
have
they wrote the script for Ghostbusters.
and sometimes it works. There's no question
Yeah.
about that. Sometimes it really works. But I was forced to kind of think through what is my process. And I started by doing a manual cluster analysis of all the companies that I had worked with in my past. So I took a sticky notepad and I wrote down every company that I had worked with or knew a lot about at that point in my career, it was probably 20 years ago that I did this. So there were, I don't know, 200 or 300 companies in this pile of sticky notes. And I began to sort of just manually create a cluster analysis. What do these companies have in common? And I pushed them over here. What are these? What are these? And I wound up with these three piles, right? There were companies that had super high customer focus in common. Then there was another pile that had super high product focus in common, very engineering driven. And then there was this smaller pile that were people like Steve Jobs trying to change the world, trying to change our behavior on a fundamental level. Yeah. So I gave them labels. I call them mothers, mechanics, and missionaries. And what I've learned over the course of applying that is that knowing who you are at your core DNA, helps you leverage that DNA for your advantage in the market. So I like to say, know what you're made of so you can make something of it. And just to say again how companies are like people, you know, if you have I don't know if you guys have children or not, but if you have a kid and the kid shows this amazing talent, let's say to play the piano, it's probably not smart of you as a parent to force that kid to stop playing the piano and start playing tennis instead, because you happen to like tennis better than the piano, right? If the kid's DNA is designed for the piano, or designed for basketball, as Steph Curry is, or designed for, you know, marketing, writing copy, that should be leveraged to that kid's advantage. And the same is true with the company. If your DNA is all about being super, super highly customer focused, then leverage that DNA to your advantage. So that's really what that DNA thing is all about.
Can you be more than one? Can you be a mother and a mechanic, or can you be mother and a missionary?
No, you really can't. And but it's just like DNA in that it's your facing personality that is one thing. It's supported by little bits and pieces of the others, right?
Mm.
But the facing personality is different. And the reason that I know this, because in my little cluster analysis, I went through what are the commonalities of mother companies, right? Well, for example, mother companies care a lot more about customer relationships than they do about market share. These kinds of companies hire highly customer success oriented people. They talk about customer success in meetings. They just do things very, very differently from product oriented companies. They even structure themselves differently. So there are actual differences, physical hardcore differences between the way these companies operate. And if you happen to be a mother focused company, but you're operating like a mechanic company, you're going to run into misalignment, and you're going to run into the problem of not leveraging what you're really good at.
But
So
wouldn't you
that's
say Apple was a mechanic and missionary, because they were very
no.
product focused too, were they not?
Apple was totally a missionary company. Product, they stole every one of those product pieces from other companies. None of that stuff was originally developed at Apple. None of it. And so Steve was just really good at, if you're going to change human behavior on a fundamental level, which he wanted to do with that computer, you had to get the best of the best, right? So a lot of this stuff he took from Xerox PARC. I mean, this is kind of common knowledge, but he did not invent any of that stuff. In fact, over the course of his career, I think the only real thing he actually really invented from the ground up was the music system that he
Yeah.
came up with Apple Music.
Would you say SpaceX is kind of the same way, because he's taking off the shelf technology that's already available and just commercializing? Or would you say, are they mechanic or are they missionary, because that
Did you say
technology
SpaceX?
already
Did you
exists?
say you said
SpaceX,
SpaceX?
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think exactly. I think they're missionary. Well, I think Elon Musk is a huge missionary, right? And one of the great things that Elon Musk gives the world is hope, right? And that there's nothing better for a missionary to deliver to an audience than hope. So I think he's a missionary. But I wanted to say one more thing about Apple as a missionary. So under Steve Jobs, Apple was definitely a missionary company. In fact, they did everything around that idea of changing human behavior. They did not behave like a mother company or even a product company at all. But what happened is, when Steve died, he left the company, of course, in the hands of Tim Cook, who, by the way, in my opinion, is probably the world's best, most amazing steward of the assets that he was left. No question about it. He's created intense value for that company. But he tried very hard in the early years of his leadership there to replace Steve with someone else. Johnny Ive was one of the people he tried to replace Steve with, and he had a few others that were in line for that, because he wanted to keep that missionary thing going, right? That next big thing idea. But unfortunately, none of those things worked, right? The muse was gone. Steve was the muse, and he was gone. And so the company has drifted over now into a product-oriented company. So now
I was
what you
just
see
about
them,
to say,
yeah,
does that affect the leadership? Can that change, even though your DNA is missionary, because the leadership changed? Can
it
that
changed. Yes,
become a
they
mechanic?
drifted over there, right? It wasn't an intentional move on the part of the leadership to become a product oriented company, because he tried to stay over there in the missionary very, very hard, but it just wasn't working. And so they've drifted over. Now they've embraced it, and that they're a product company, and I think everybody knows that.
Is
I'll just say
better
one.
than the
Oh,
other?
go ahead.
Is missionary better than mechanic, or does it not?
No, it doesn't. Each one of these companies can be amazingly successful. Like Oracle is an amazingly successful mechanic company. Microsoft is also a mechanic company, amazingly successful, right? And as on the mother side of the equation, we've got Adobe is an amazingly successful company, and they're a mother company. They focus on the marketing arena. So you can be successful in any one of these things. It's just, and part of the reason they are successful is they use their DNA to their advantage. And I did want to say something about this shift, because yes, companies can shift from one to another. Sometimes it happens to them, like it did with Apple, where they drifted over to the product side after Steve died. But in the case of Amazon, Amazon actually started off as a mechanic company, product company. If you remember, over 30 years ago when they launched, they said, we're an online bookseller, right? Very, very specific to a product. They were trying to be very simple about it. They had online book selling. They captured that great line and did a great job with it. But then as time kind of marched forward, you saw Amazon bite off more and more pieces of the world, right? To tackle. And sometime around, I'm going to say 15 years ago or so, I don't know the exact time, Bezos made the decision that he wanted the company to be Earth's most customer centric company. And he made that the new mission statement. We want to be Earth's most customer centric company.
And that makes
And he
them
started. What was that?
that makes them the mother, right?
That's right. So they're trying to move to be a mother. And here's the thing, though. He did probably a million tactical things to actually steer that shift from mechanic to mother. And it started with the acquisition of Zappos. So he made the decision to buy Zappos. And believe me, it wasn't because Jeff Bezos couldn't figure out how to sell shoes online at that point, right? He knew how to sell shoes online. He bought Zappos because Tony Hsieh had developed a culture there that was so amazingly customer centric that he wanted that culture to be infused inside of Amazon. That's also around the time when he decided that every meeting was going to have an empty chair. And what did that chair represent? The customer. I want everybody to always remember the customer all the time. He announced the mission statement. We're going to be Earth's most customer-centric company. So it just kept going and going and going. And tactic after tactic after tactic was designed to be this mother-oriented company. So that's an example of a company that purposefully steered itself to another direction. And Apple is an example of a company that drifted over there. So, but both of them are now leveraging what they do well at this stage.
And do you think that should be a conversation that you occasionally have with your customers? If we're talking about leaving an empty chair because the importance of being forward thinking enough, how often do you think that you should talk to your customers about things that matter in your company like that?
I think that if you're a mother company, you got to be talking to your customers all the time. And if you think about Procter and Gamble or Clorox or some of these consumer packaged goods companies, they grow up with the idea that they actually go into the homes of people to watch how they wash their dishes, how they clean their clothes. I mean, they are so intimately knowledgeable about their customers that it puts technology companies to shame, because we don't look at our customers like that. So if you're a mother company, you've got to have this super close relationship with your customers. If you're a product company, it's not quite as important, because you're really just trying to develop the next thing in product, right? And so the companies that you acquire, they just become features on your platform, and you're just constantly absorbing these features into the product list. If you talk to an Oracle customer, you'll know that the customers that are customers of Oracle know that Oracle doesn't spend any time with their customers. It's just not what they do. All right. So, and then the next big thing, companies like Apple and Tesla, and remember Starbucks, Starbucks changed the way we thought about coffee. FedEx changed the way we thought about package delivery. These companies behave very differently, and they're trying to change our behavior. And so they do it in a whole different way, right? They focus on what's the next big thing.
You worked with Larry Ellison at all?
I worked with Oracle. I never actually worked directly with Larry. I wish that I had, but I never had. But I worked with Larry's direct reports several times.
So there was a time when Larry left the company and then came back, I think, when the former CEO, I think, passed away. Does that change again? Did the DNA change again? Or
no, you know what? I don't think
the same?
I don't think that Oracle's DNA ever changed, and I don't think that Larry Ellison ever left the company. He may not have been the CEO, but he was absolutely always the figurehead, regardless. So his DNA remained the driving force of that company, even when he wasn't there, even still today.
I was Dan. You wanted to ask?
If you have something, go ahead. I have another tangent that I'd like to get into, but if you'd like to tie the knot on this one.
Yeah, no, I wanted to ask. I remember in college and high school, we had, everyone, all the cool people had BlackBerry phones, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then it changed. And I saw that you also worked with BlackBerry. So where's BlackBerry going? What are they doing?
Oh, that is such a great question. I know John Chen will appreciate me saying this, because BlackBerry. So John Chen is the current CEO, and he was brought in to turn around the company after it became apparent to the board that it was a dying smartphone company. And we can get into why it died. I know why it died, but we'll get into that in a minute. But when John Chen came in, he had to come up with a strategy for turning around this company. Okay. And that is a huge challenge with a company the size of BlackBerry. And he came up with this idea that what it really should be is a software company. And so I then came in and worked with John Chen to help him figure out this pivoting strategy, if you will. And really what happened was we went through an exercise of looking at the assets that the company had that were worth saving for the future. And there really were only a couple of them. One of them was mobility, because BlackBerry was very good with mobility from a technology perspective. And the other one was security. BlackBerry was and still is known as one of the highest end security companies. So the notion of becoming an enterprise security software company is what emerged as the strategy that we were going to pursue. And that is what we did. And the company is making that transition. It's not an overnight thing, right? It's John Chen re-upped his contract as the CEO, and so he's committed to taking that company to become a world-renowned enterprise software security company, which I think it can do. But as you can imagine, he had to change everything: revenue recognition models, product development, sales, marketing. Everything had to change in that company to move from being essentially a consumer product that was also sold to businesses like this to being an enterprise software security company.
So why did it fail?
So BlackBerry failed because at the time, BlackBerry was leaning into the whole notion of security because it was so good at it, right? And we all know all the FBI agents had BlackBerries, all the very secretive and very wealthy CEOs all had BlackBerries. In fact, a lot of people had a BlackBerry and an iPhone together, and they would carry them around together because the BlackBerry was their security thing. And the way that BlackBerry was able to maintain such a high security position in the market is that it had very few apps, because the more apps that you have, the less secure you are. Mm-hmm. Apple made the choice to embrace apps and become the platform for apps, right? And the market made its decision, and the decision was we want apps over security. So that's what happened. They all moved to the Android and the Apple model because of the apps, and they moved away from BlackBerry
too. Nokia, they had such a massive market share, and how do you get that big and then lose it?
Isn't that it's so frustrating, isn't it?
Them getting away from their DNA or not staying in touch with their customers. How do you get? Because some people say you're too big to fail, right? You have that. Oh well, Amazon's too big to fail. But we've seen companies that are massive, and not that they've failed, but they're no longer the market leader in that segment.
Right, and that's what happened to BlackBerry. So the BlackBerry had actually a good reason to fail, right? It chose the wrong strategy. It chose a strategy that the market didn't want. In the case of Nokia, I don't actually know why Nokia failed, but I will say that disruption plays a huge role in the failure of incumbents, and disruption, which is a concept that Clay Christensen came out with in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma, a number of years ago, which is really, a lot of times a new technology that enables people to do something better, faster, cheaper, not just a little bit better, faster, cheaper, but an order of magnitude better, faster, cheaper, is what creates a disruption. And my guess is that Nokia got disrupted by some of these other players, Apple being one and Android being the other. So, it's a technology that does things better, faster, cheaper, and people choose it over the incumbent.
Is Facebook a mother company, a missionary, or a mechanic? Because now, again, my question earlier that can you be more than one? Because they are coming out with actual tangible products or Oculus, right?
Right.
So
I really have my headset right here.
Oh, there you go. So no,
fantastic product.
Facebook is through and through a mechanic. There's no question about it. And I worked with them. So I got to be on the inside of that company to see exactly how much of a mechanic they really are. They care only about their product and proliferating their product for sure. But they are not a customer focused company at all.
So the things that you talk about in your book, Get to Aha, and I've given that book to a lot of the people that work at Aspeto as well, just because it's so informative and you gain so much from it.
Thank you.
The question was, do you think that your business has to be a certain size to implement those things? Or could it be a mom and pop shop in downtown Fredericksburg, Virginia, or even a franchise, right? Or does it only work for companies that have global presence?
No, I think it applies to companies of any and all sizes. The better positioned you are in a market, whether you're a convenience store down the street or whether you are a multi-billion dollar, software company for enterprises, it's you'll do better if you're well positioned. So if that convenience store, so I live in a town here in Sausalito, California, where there are two convenience stores. One of them is a 7-Eleven, and the other one is kind of this mom and pop sort of very friendly place where you can buy kind of all kinds of cool things. And so their place in the market is that they're the friendly convenience store, right? And the 7-Eleven is just drop in and buy a carton of milk and get the heck out of there. There's
Yeah,
no
not that friendly.
personality.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think no matter what you are, if you position yourself well and build a little brand around it, you're going to do better. And building that brand around who you actually are is kind of the important message that I like to leave people. It's like whoever you are at your core, that's what you should elevate to build your brand out of. Whether you're a human being trying to build a personal brand, or whether you're a company trying to build a big enterprise brand.
Are there companies in the market that you see that have done well? They're bigger, but you're like, man, they do not know their positioning, because
so
you have to
many
know your
companies.
positioning in order for you to do well. Because again, I think finding your DNA, figuring out your position in the market is one of the hardest things.
Very hard.
I know that even after being in business for 13, 14 years, sometimes we still struggle with this. In fact, that's how I came across you.
Okay.
Because we were struggling with that. So the question is that there are companies, Aspeto is a profitable company, that companies can still be profitable and not know their positioning, but is that sustainable? And are there companies that you see that you're like, man, they're doing billions of dollars, but they have no idea what their DNA is? So two questions.
Yeah, so I think you can totally be successful or profitable without knowing those things, right? Especially if you happen to have like Facebook is a great example of this, right? Facebook was essentially equivalent to selling sugar to children, right? It was so sticky as a product that you couldn't not use it or buy it. You almost couldn't not do it, right? So they didn't need to know any of these other things, right? They stumbled upon or strategized to, or however they came up with this idea, this product that was so sticky it was like selling sugar to kids. Now they've got a much more complicated situation, and things are more difficult. But obviously they were successful before figuring all these things out. And so I think if you figure these things out, though, you have a more accelerated path to greater success. And so figuring it out is good for you, right? It's just like, can you be, relatively fit without working out for 2 hours every day? Yeah, you could be relatively fit, but you're going to be a lot fitter if you work out 2 hours a day. You're better. You're going to be better for it if you do this work. So it's about getting better.
Mm-hmm.
Well, fantastic. I want to get into that side tangent that I had, if that's
Oh yes, your tangent.
no,
Bring it on.
no, I don't want to cut anyone off. There's just so much good information that this could literally be its own TED Talk. But so you quickly mentioned the Oculus, and not to give away too much free publicity, but I really enjoy using virtual reality. And there is
Cool.
one feature in there that they have a documentary about Fallujah. And so a lot of veterans like myself who went through the city of Fallujah were very curious to see what was going on now, what's life is like now. And so to
Wow.
be able to use this documentary to go through the city and to feel like you're back on certain roads that you haven't been in a while, that you never thought that you'd go back to, is
Wow.
an extremely valuable asset. And so when we consider the way that a lot of advertising and positioning and branding kind of affects the veteran audience, um, we also have to acknowledge the fact that when you have somebody who's an entrepreneur starting out from the military, most of the time they're not going to be extremely well funded. They're probably doing it on their spare time during their 9 to 5, and
Right.
there might be that kind of panic moment where they think that something's not going right. And if you're not a huge successful company like BlackBerry that does have revenue coming in, you might panic and you might do things in a sense of self-preservation. So we've talked extensively about how positioning and how acknowledging your DNA can affect these larger companies. What advice would you have for perhaps a small veteran-owned business that really quite hasn't established enough revenue to be able to have the flexibility to try new things out? What advice would you have for them as far as when you
Sure.
get to that panic moment where you're like, oh man, I don't think that I'm going to succeed?
Right.
And
What
how
would
much
you
We
tell
all
time
them?
do you need, and how long does it take to, in a way, see results, right? Like as soon as you implement it, are you going to give yourself 3 months? Because as Dan said, if you're in a panic mode, is this a life-saving thing, or yeah?
That's a really great question. I first I want to thank all of you veterans for your service to the country. My father was a World War II veteran, and I just really appreciate what you have all done. So thank you for that. So if you're doing a business now, which is congratulations on that as well, because that's a pretty big step to start a business. I work with a client right now who is a very small company. They're a startup. There's only 2 of them in the company, and they engaged with me to help them with this positioning thing. And the big question I got yesterday when I was in the room with them is, oh my God, we woke up yesterday morning and realized we don't have any money to make any of this stuff happen right now. Like, so what do we do? What do we do? I mean, my God, we've got these great ideas about how we're
And
going to
she
pay
hung up.
someone, but we
Andy hung up the phone. Funny?
Click, block, block,
yeah,
block.
yes. Yeah. Yeah, no. I here's what I said, and I would say this to the veterans who are starting anybody starting a company that where you're in that panic mode, and believe me, I've been there myself. It's a tough place to be. But what you're really doing with this positioning exercise is you are really developing strategy. It's all about strategy, right? And so when it comes to activating that strategy, you have choices to make about how much you want to do, how much you want to spend, or spend nothing at all. But now you have a strategy, right? You have an articulated strategy. So whether maybe the only thing you do is hire one person, but now you have a strategy to explain to them, this is what our company's doing. This is what we're looking for. This is how we're positioned in the market. So even if you don't have any money to actually make something come to fruition at the moment, what you're doing is changing the way you're going to make your future decisions by having this positioning strategy figured out. So it's totally valuable to you, even if you can't activate it for another year. So that's one answer. And the other thing you asked me about is, how much, it takes time for these things to happen, right? You can't just like snap your finger and all of a sudden your position has changed in the market. So what I can tell you is the fastest that I ever saw change happen was 3 months, which I know if you're panicked in a business situation, it seems like forever. But in the big world of marketing, 3 months is really nothing. And that was really with BlackBerry, with the BlackBerry turnaround. We were able to affect some change in 3 months, which was great. And we did it through educating the analyst community about what the new BlackBerry strategy was, and we did it by reorienting all of BlackBerry's followers. BlackBerry had millions of followers as a smartphone company, and led by the way by Kim Kardashian. BlackBerry paid Kim Kardashian to be the tribe leader of all the BlackBerry followers on social media. And we had to basically go to those millions of social media followers and say, no more Kim Kardashian, and by the way, no more BlackBerry. like everything is changing. We're becoming an enterprise software company. We came up with this idea that at that time the Internet of Things was a big common thing, and it turns out that BlackBerry's technology actually enables people to secure every little piece in the Internet of Things. So the Internet of Things has all kinds of things in it, right? In it and on it. Things like toasters are in the Internet of Things, little monitors, little semiconductors, all these things make up the Internet of Things. And we came up with this phrase, the enterprise of things, because that's what BlackBerry was securing. And that little phrase actually caught on really well with the analyst community and with the enterprise community, which we were then moving into. So we did start to see change in 3 months, and it happened with that meme. I'll say that memes are really important in marketing, whether you're marketing B2B or B2C. If you can come up with some
That's
kind
literally
of
how
a
I started
meme.
this company.
Oh, really? Really? What was
I
your
was
meme?
just
What was
super
your meme?
depressed on the couch, and I just made a lot of jokes about my experience in the military, and eventually the following grew, and people were like, hey, can we pay you to post this? And I was like, well,
Oh my
this isn't
God.
Kim Kardashian money, but I think I'm
You know,
available.
that Kim Kardashian move was probably them waking up and panicking. They're like, who can we pay this?
Well,
Probably.
she did attend the Marine Corps ball a few years ago, so it is a possibility that she listens to the show. So I don't want to
She might.
alienate a potential listener,
You're right.
No,
but
She's great.
absolutely
She's
not. She might be out there. Hi, Kim. We
yeah.
miss you at BlackBerry.
great.
And say, one of these small businesses, say they don't quite have Kardashian sponsorship money. Is there any advice that you have that people may overlook in their day-to-day habits that would be beneficial for their positioning?
Yes, absolutely. And this is very simple but very hard to do. And it's the concept of consistency and frequency. And so it's if you think about success in life, let's just talk about maybe losing weight as one thing that people try to do, right? The only way you can be successful with losing weight is to be consistent and frequent with it, right? Same thing with physical fitness. The only way to get physically fit is consistency and frequency. The only way to learn I play the trumpet. I used to play the trumpet in college. The only way to be good at the trumpet is consistency and frequency. Everything is about consistency and frequency. So once you come to what your new position is, you have a meme to describe it, by the way, because that's a very important thing. And you're just consistent and frequent with the use of that language, whether you're posting or whether you're on a phone with somebody or whether you're sitting next to somebody on an airplane or writing website copy or whatever it is you're doing. That little phrase that describes what your company does needs to be said over and over and over and over again. It used to be back in the 20s when there was a rule that was developed that we have adopted in the world of marketing. We call it the marketing rule of 7. And this was invented in the 20s when they were trying to market movies. And they did a bunch of research in Hollywood to determine how many times does a person need to see a message about a movie before they will consider buying a ticket or buy a ticket. And it turned out back in the 20s, it was 7 times. Okay, 7 times they had to see a message before they would consider buying a ticket. So today we have, like, how many more channels do we have than we had in the 20s? Like, we've got, millions of channels now. So I call it the marketing rule of 7,000 now. But you've got to, the point is, you have to tell somebody something over and over and over and over again before it sticks in their brain. But that is the way to make something stick. It's all about consistency and frequency.
What are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen startups or companies make when it comes to just positioning?
Well, I think the biggest mistake is they think it's branding. And so they get a new logo, they get a new tagline, they create a color scheme, they even get a website developed. And then somebody has to write the copy for the website. And the copywriter is like, okay, what do we say about who we are? And there's no answer. And so I think that's the biggest mistake that people make is they think that creating a brand is around these, what I'll call the softer side of marketing, not the hard. There's a hardcore side of marketing that has to happen first, and it's hard. It's I call it hardcore because it's hardcore important, but it's also hard. To, like you mentioned early on, Abbas, about the idea of how hard it is to work these issues out. Who are you? Like, I used to do a lot of work with Sun Microsystems, which doesn't exist anymore. But there was a very, very flamboyant and kind of famous CEO of the company at the time, a guy named Scott McNeely. And I worked very closely with the guy who was his handler. And the guy that I worked with used to take a piece of paper before Scott would get up in front of any audience. And my friend would sit in the front row. His name was Jeremy. He'd sit in the front row. And on the piece of paper was written, "Make me care." Make me care. And he'd hold it up so Scott could see it while he was talking. And that's the key to everything, right? You don't need any money to make someone care. What you need is passion, and you need a position, and you need a way to talk about your position. And none of this costs money, right? It's all about your behavior.
Just time.
Yeah.
Yes, there is time. There's no question about that. But
Yeah,
everything good in
and
life takes time, right?
oh, for sure. We have heard in the past that time is a resource, and so when we're looking at a small business, do you have a rule that you go by of how much either time or percentage of budget should be dedicated
Oh,
to various components?
yeah, that's a great question. So I think that B2B companies don't spend enough money on marketing, and as soon as sales droop a little bit, they immediately snip marketing off at the knees, and it's gone. And I think that's a huge mistake. So, you need to have an R&D budget, you need to have a marketing budget, you need to have a sales budget. But I'm a big believer in marketing. First, invest in marketing before you invest in sales, because marketing is there to prepare the market for sales. So if you happen to be a startup
Invest in
company,
marketing first, you're saying, before
invest
sales.
in marketing first, right? Because marketing's job is to prepare the market for sales. So give them an opportunity to do that, to prepare the market. Then bring on the
Get those
sales
7
force.
impressions.
Yes, get those 7 impressions, and then bring on the sales guys who can take the leads that marketing should be giving them and turn them into closures, right? And close those sales.
There's so many marketing
you know,
companies that don't produce, and that is very discouraging, because as a business owner, I've hired marketing companies, and I would give them, even PR firms, where I would give them a pretty decent budget, and then nothing comes out of it, and then I'm just like, you know what, I'm done with marketing firms. I can't do it anymore.
Very frustrating. And I would bet, and of course I don't know this, but I would bet that the reason that most of those marketing situations failed is because you didn't have the positioning. Because the positioning has to be this thing that becomes so sticky that people, that there's product market fit there, right? There's such product market fit with your positioning statement that people want to learn about it. They want to hear about it, right? So I feel like
none of them asked, who are you? I mean, other than my therapist and you, no one else has asked, who are you?
Hey, you and I had like a 4-hour drive to the Poland-Ukraine border, and I asked.
True. Who are you?
Dan asked who you are, and you couldn't get away from it.
We were stuck in a car together going from, I think it was Rzeszów to the border of Ukraine.
Rzeszów,
Oh my God.
And that was an interesting.
I asked.
Yes, he did.
So,
yes, he did.
What it almost sounds like is, with positioning, you are seeking to place yourself in between the customer, the consumer, and whatever their goal is. So kind of like they're Persians, their happiness is the rest of Greece, and we're just the Spartans there.
Yeah.
The size of 5,000 with accompaniments. Just, if you want happiness, you have to go through us.
I like that idea. Yeah, go through the marketing people. One of the great strategies, just to mention, especially if you have a small company and you're trying to compete in a big world, find your tribe, right? Who is your tribe? Find your tribe, just like what Steve did with Macintosh, right? He went through a big failure with it, went through another failure with NeXT, and then he discovered the tribe. And the tribe for him was the creator types, right? So who's the tribe for your little company? And then land and expand.
Especially, again, this podcast is very much focused on the military veteran community. For them, it is almost, I'm not saying it's easier, but to define a tribe, if your company is veteran focused or, somehow connected to military, Dan, you can tell me that I'm completely off, but I feel like that tribe is almost kind of there because you have that fraternity almost there, right?
So it's a bit of a dual-edged sword. Yes, you have that immediate connection because there is the sense of camaraderie and shared experience. However, pause for effect, veterans are notoriously hard to market to. You've met AJ. He is a grumpy old cactus, self-proclaimed. He is self-proclaimed the hardest demographic to market to because he is skeptical of all things. So, with that being said, are there any...
sound like beard oil or something like that? Those are
you can only buy so much beard oil. But with that being said, are there any personality traits or mindset centric business principles that you see in veterans or people like your grandfather that you think are beneficial to them in business or are a detriment to them in business?
Yeah, I mean, doing a business is really hard for all of the veterans who have started businesses. Again, congratulations, because it's nothing but pain and hardship most of the time.
Just heartbreak and suffering.
Heartbreak and suffering.
Just 2 a.m. burritos and heartburn.
Exactly. Until you get that one success, right? Then you have one success, and oh my God, you're just elated beyond belief to have achieved that success. So the traits in a human that is typically successful in business is just tenacity, right? It's like the ability to just keep going, even when the rest of things around you are look like hell, right? And veterans are very good at that, right? I mean, I think that's that's one of the big traits of veterans, is they understand how to keep going in the face of what appears to be incredible disaster, and those are the people who typically succeed. Like, and
Sounds
again,
like my
just to
dating
use
life.
Steve Jobs.
I found success now, but it was choppy there for a minute.
Yeah, it's always choppy, right? It's always choppy. Like, you never give up,
Tenacity in the
right? It's
face
about,
of disaster after disaster.
there you go. So you've been through it. You know how to do it. Now you know how to win.
If you see a shoe come flying in, you just put it on the side.
That's Sam right there.
And so, what kind of personality traits do you see that are obstacles in that people present as their own obstacles and getting in the way of their own success in business?
Yes, that's a really great question. What I think is that people who are not introspective. So in other words, people who kind of, sometimes these people can be arrogant people. Sometimes they're unaware of their surroundings. They're narcissistic in many ways. Those kinds of people tend to not be very good at business, because you have to take in all this data. Another thing I know that veterans are really good at is situational awareness, right? Because they have to be dealing in situations, that are very dangerous. So you need situational awareness, and having situational awareness as you are going through the business journey is really critical, because you got to be able to see that competitor that's coming at you from this side, or you got to see the customer that's unhappy over here from this side, and you've got to head it off at the pass before that becomes a true disaster for you. So I think those types of people who don't exhibit those traits are typically destined to fail in business.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I know you have to get out of here soon, but I do have one question that I would be remiss if I let you off the show without asking. We spoke a little bit about the virtual reality, and one of the neat things about there is that people, creative types, they can animate, they can create worlds and environments. And one of the most impactful moments of my life was, sitting in the movie theater watching a Pixar movie, and that the pull of the heartstring. And for that brief moment, I forgot about that firefight in Al Anbar province. For a brief moment, I forgot about the heartache of looking at your bank account and realizing that it wasn't quite worth the effort.
Right.
And so what was it like to work with a company that has been so impactful in so many people's lives?
In Pixar, are you referring to?
Yeah.
Pixar? Yeah, it really was magical. I mean, I actually worked with Pixar before it was a storytelling company. So, we all know it today as a storytelling company that pulls at your heartstrings. But actually, Pixar was originally a computer. It was a box about this big, and it was what we call in the graphics world a graphics rendering engine. It was designed to make graphics happen really fast for the world, for other people, right? For movie companies or other people on the outside. And it really wasn't until Steve got there that he realized that this demo guy in the back room named John Lasseter, who was an amazingly creative guy, was writing these little stories just to demo how well the computer could render graphics. And Steve is like looking at it and going, "Oh my God, this is it. This is the thing, right? This is touching me as a human." And that computer, there are lots of rendering engines, right? And this might be faster than others, but there are lots of those. There are very few John Lasseters. So he was able to kind of pivot the company. And that's one of the things Steve was so very good at was really what touches you as a human being, right? He knew how to create an environment around people that would make them think certain things, right? He could change the furniture, change the things on tables, just to manipulate how you thought about something. So touching a heartstring was something he was naturally very, very good at. And Pixar, of course, had the talent to do it, and Steve had the foresight to make it actually happen there. So
I wonder if he ever staged the house in a certain way before he got into an argument with his significant other, just to kind of set the stage.
Steve apparently was notorious about spending money on furniture. At NeXT, that was one of the big things that
absolutely
spent like thousands upon thousands of dollars per chair.
Absolutely. I used to do press tours with him in New York, where we would go to his favorite hotel there, which happened to be the Carlisle Hotel. And we would get in around 10 o'clock at night, and we would spend 3 or 4 or 5 hours rearranging the furniture, getting things out of the room, bringing in flowers and candy and fruit and things that he wanted to sit around the room, completely changing the environment of what was already a gorgeous room at the Carlisle Hotel and turning it into the environment that he thought was best going to cause the people that came in, which at that time were the journalists, to think a certain way about Steve, about Apple, about the product. He was brilliant at that.
That's incredible.
And in the military, we call that shaping the battlefield to your desire, where, you know, you always have to ask yourself, if this is the hill that I'm going to die on, am I happy with this the way it looks? Do I need to improve sandbags? Do I need to change lines of fire? Do I need to move claymores? And so, you know, the military has a little bit of that ingrained into them, where you shape the battlefield to your desire. And one last saved final round. Do you have any projects coming up that you want to shout out, that you're excited about, that you'd like to get the word out there?
Yes.
We can get that first impression, that first tap right here.
Very quickly. I'm actually launching an online curriculum that will also include some in-person seminars. I'm teaching people how to do positioning. So I'm calling it the C School. And I would love to, we're doing a beta test of the in-person session next week with 10 of people who run small agencies. And then we're going to do another beta test in February of people who are internal marketers. And then we're going to launch this curriculum. So I'm very close to launching the C School. So I'd love for your listeners I'd love to let them know when it's ready to go. That'd be great.
Oh, for sure. We'd be more than happy to have you back on once it gets to that point. But I know you have to get out of here. You're very busy. Thank you so much, everybody. Andy Cunningham, make sure you check out Get to Aha, her fantastic book. Also, A Boss. Check out aspedo.com. Also, make sure you check out popsmokemedia.com for news, stories, and updates. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today.
It was a pleasure. And goodbye, everybody. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.